I saw this on a tweet made by NHL Watcher, and I was like, oh boy, that is a video topic right here. So, without further ado, let's head over onto Twitter and see what exactly it was sparked this type of reaction out of me. NHL Watcher tweeted out last night, tough way to go out for Florida, but that was a hell of a run. It was eerily similar to Montreal's run in 2021. Now that kind of rhymed, so that was pretty cool, but either way, when I saw this, everything sort of clicked in my mind, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, yeah. We'd been sort of alluding to this idea that the Florida Panthers' 2023 playoff run was similar to Montreal's 2021 run, but it didn't really hit until the cup was awarded and everything was finalized. So today, what I wanted to do was go over to Montreal's 2021 Stanley Cup Finals appearance and compare it to the Florida Panthers Stanley Cup Finals appearance from this year, starting out with what happened in the first round. Now, you gotta remember, back in 2021 when the Habs were in the playoffs, this was not the regular divisional format that we're used to. It was the shutdown bubble year, so there was a North Division, a West Division. It was weird, and a lot of people were sort of spooked out by the idea that a Canadian team would be guaranteed into the Final Four. But Montreal played off against the top team in the North Division, the Toronto Maple Leafs. Meanwhile, the Florida Panthers, they squeaked into the playoffs as the final wildcard team, going up against the first team in the Atlantic, the Boston Bruins. The Bruins happened to be the first team in the NHL in terms of regular season ranking. So, right away, these two teams squeak in as underdogs. They play off against the best teams in their division / the NHL, and they both go down 3-1. Boston had a 3-1 lead over Florida after Game 4. Toronto had a 3-1 lead over Montreal after Game 4. And guess what happened next? Both teams rallied back and won 3 straight games to take the series in 7 with 2 overtime wins in the process. Montreal won in overtime in Games 5 and Game 6, then won Game 7 3-1, winning everything. Meanwhile, the Florida Panthers also clawed back. They won 3 straight, and 2 of those games were in overtime. Games 5 and Game 7, both in OT. So right away, just from the first series, the bottom seed ends up defeating the top seed after being down 3-1 and rallying back with 2 overtime wins in their final 3 games. Then you have yourselves the second round. This is where things get interesting because both the Florida Panthers and the Montreal Canadiens dominated. Montreal had a 4-0 sweep of the Winnipeg Jets. The Florida Panthers had a 5-1 win over the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, sure, 2 of those games were in overtime, but just based off of how the games were going, Florida was the better team than Toronto. Montreal was the better team than Winnipeg. And in fact, if you go over to the next series too, this was a pretty alright series for both. I mean, you could say that the parallel is that both Montreal and Florida had a sweep in there after the first round on their way to the finals, but in the Western Conference Finals, and I say Western Conference Finals because it was technically the West, the Montreal Canadiens easily beat the Vegas Golden Knights. It was a 4-2 win. 3 overtime games were in there, but they really looked like the better team. Meanwhile, you have the Florida Panthers that swept the Carolina Hurricanes, but even though it was a sweep, all the games were tight, all the games were 1-goal games, and many of these goals were decided towards the end of the frame. So it was a very tight series, even though on paper it looks like a sweep and that Florida might have dominated. 2 of the games went to overtime. 1 of the games went to quadruple overtime. So that's kind of where everything lies there. But then, at this point in time, it's quite interesting because for the first 3 rounds, you could say that both the Panthers and the Canadiens were carried by their goaltending and their defensive play. The Panthers were led by Bobrovsky and the Canadiens were led by Carey Price. And it was super good seeing how these guys were able to take control of the games and just calm the pace down. They were playing their style and they were both expensive, $10+ million AAV goaltenders right there, proving why they're worth that much. And so the parallels to how these two bottom seed teams stormed their way into the finals after being down 3-1 in their first series and clawing back to win quite astounding. Obviously, you could say the Canadiens had a benefit because of the format, and that if the NHL were divided into its regular divisions, they might not have made it that far, but they still took advantage of what was given to them, that North Division's existence, automatically placing a Canadian team into the Final Four in the first place. But the Habs were also being carried by their defensive play. Weber, Edmondson, Petrie, and Sherratt, these guys were doing their thing. Such a stacked top four, not with the points, but just in terms of how they were able to shut down opposition. Meanwhile, for the Panthers, you had yourselves a very good and momentum-filled run that forced them into the finals and unfortunately put them in a spot where they had a 10-day break before waiting for the Vegas Golden Knights to make their final series appearance. So, heading into the finals, this is where things get even more similar, because the Florida Panthers and Montreal Canadiens lost both their final series in 5 games. It was 4-1 the final score, and based off of how everything went down, I mean, Montreal was down 3-0, then they won Game 4 in overtime before losing 1-0 in Game 5. Florida, on the other hand, they were down 2-0 before winning a game in overtime and then losing 2 straight. So I guess you could say that both of these games, the games won by the losing teams, were both in overtime. Montreal's only win in the final was an overtime win, so was Florida's. However, Florida did have much more of an embarrassing loss towards the end, 9-3 final score. Meanwhile, Montreal only lost in the cup-winning game 1-0, so it was a little bit tighter there, but at the same time, the Cinderella run for both of these teams was so eerily similar when you acknowledge how both of these series went in round 1, how they went in the finals, the run to get to the finals, the fact that they were both carried by $10 million AAV goaltenders, and how they were both bottom-seeded teams. In fact, we talked about this the other day, but Florida was really similar to Miami in the NBA. Yeah, both bottom-seeded teams, barely squeaking into the playoffs, making a Cinderella run to the finals, and losing in 5 games to a team that everybody was like, oh yeah, I mean, Jokic, right? Oh yeah, Eichel, right? Kind of funny how everything is so similar in this year's NHL Finals series. I mean, scriptwriters, come on, stop writing things and reusing plots from older years. But either way, if you're a Canadiens fan or a Panthers fan, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about the similarities between Montreal in 2021 and Florida in 2023? I will say that Montreal was just simply outplayed in the finals in 2021. They lost. They were the inferior team. Florida, you could say the same thing, especially towards the end there. All the giveaways, all the odd man rushes, the goals against Bobrovsky stopped being clutch. He was not able to do what he had been doing for the rest of the playoffs in that final series. And Carey Price, unfortunately, I don't want to say that he suffered the same fate. It's just Tampa Bay was so good in 2021 that Montreal didn't really have a chance, I feel, especially after that first game. But either way, you can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. What are your opinions about the similarities between Florida and Montreal? I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.